Hey guys, welcome back for another exciting video. Last week, we made some firefly ant hybrids based off of Navajo mythology, or an entity known as the Black God, Hashi-e-Shijini. I have got to stop putting that name in my videos, it's killing me each time. This week though, I have something completely unique in store for you. I feel like there are multiple Pokemon in my region that may end up as pseudo-legendaries. I know there's typically one, but sometimes I get carried away with a concept. This is one of those days. We're going to start off small with a little chameleon seahorse hybrid and finish with an amazing Pokemon that has 6 different forms. Like I said, I got carried away. Let's start at the beginning though. How did I decide to fuse a chameleon and a seahorse? Well, the answer is in the tail. Well, sort of. Sometimes I run out of ideas. That may or may not surprise you, especially with this vibrant and fleshed out world that I often try to create. I feel like a lot of my concepts try and push the bubble and create unique Pokemon and experiences within the Wintano region. Sometimes the ideas, though, they just stop flowing, which is when I resort to my most basic Pokemon design process. I draw a shape. It's a little crazy, but I really do just start with a single shape and try to work my way from there. It's a random shape. I just let my pen or pencil, whatever I'm using, guide me. Sometimes they're lumpy, sometimes these shapes have hard edges and corners, and some are just simple circles. From there I ask myself, what does this remind me of? And in the case of this Pokemon, I ended up with a swirly-whirly kind of shape. It reminded me of Chameleon's tail, but then I was reminded that there's already a chameleon Pokemon, or maybe 2 if you count Licky Licky. That's okay. What else does this remind me of? Well, seahorses have curly tails too, right? But wait, there are plenty of seahorse Pokemon too. But that's when I had an idea come into my mind that was so stupid, it created one of my most favorite Pokemon yet. We don't have a seahorse chameleon Pokemon. I know. What are you going to do with me? As I started to draw this aquatic chameleon hybrid Pokemon, so many questions and some answers started to flow into my mind. Where does this Pokemon live? What's the point of having evolutionary traits of both chameleons and seahorses? How much of each animal should be present in the design? Where does it fit in the hierarchy of the Wintano region? Should it accompany a gym leader? Does it possess any specific powers and abilities beyond changing colors? It's a lot. You can tell my mind races as I go through this process, but I'm only going to answer one of those questions for this Pokemon. We'll cover the rest in later designs. I imagine that this Pokemon is essentially an amphibian in terms of habitat. What I mean to say is that it's capable of living in the water and on land without any real issue, though it does need to stay moist in order to survive. There's a really large lake in the north end of the Wintano map that I imagine this basic stage lives in and around. In terms of getting around on land, I think it would kind of just hop or float like we see a lot of water-type Pokemon doing. The chameleon tongue isn't really a primary feature of this Pokemon, but it could definitely use that tongue like a hookshot, maybe, to get around from tree to tree. Almost like Spider-Man, just with a much shorter range than the traditional web slinger, I guess. Meet Kamasi, the Seamelian Pokemon. Kamasi live in inland lakes in the Wintano region, but that doesn't prevent them from venturing out into the dense forests nearby. They can change colors to match any environment they find themselves in, but they do require water to keep their bodies from drying out. Despite this, they are decidedly not a water-type Pokemon, and are instead a pure normal type, though they can use some basic water-type attacks. So, what happens when this Pokemon evolves? Well, it's important to build up to our later evolution, and so it kind of needs to feel like a genetic freak. I want it to feel like it's building up to incredible genetic potential, so this Pokemon needs to look like it lived at the foot of Chernobyl. For those of you who don't know this already, there are bodies of water around the Chernobyl site, where there was a nuclear plant that had an accident. It's a terrible tragedy, but these bodies of water are believed to house crazy mutant fish due to that accident. Now, they actually don't have anything too crazy, just some fish that have reached incredible sizes. Trust me, a lot of what you're seeing is AI generated from those pictures, but I do want you to think of a bizarre mutant when you think of this Pokemon. This is why I'll draw attention to 2 specific features, the weird head and the weird arms. This Pokemon is in the baking stage of being a Pokemon, where it hasn't quite smoothed itself out yet. Its head crest and neck lumps are supposed to look chameleon-like, but unnatural at the same time. When you look at the arms, you might think there's 4 arms, but instead, they're bifurcated arms that are intended to be the halfway point between fins and chameleon hands. You see, chameleons actually have fused their pointer and middle finger into one and their pinky and ring finger into one finger, meaning that including thumbs, they do have 5 fingers, but visually they only have 3, and their hand behaves like they have 3. Another question I posed early about this Pokemon discusses the balance between chameleon and seahorse features. It's a tricky balance, but for me, I wanted to start with more of a seahorse and transition into more of a chameleon. I mentioned amphibians early on, but they have a dramatic metamorphosis that happens to them physically as they progress from the larval stage to being full-grown adults. Think of tadpoles to frogs. This Pokemon is a chameleon seahorse, no doubt, but it does behave like an amphibian. This means that while in the early stages, it's decidedly more aquatic, and the latter will not be so. I ended up deciding to move away from the chameleon eyes for this Pokemon and following evolutions. They were necessary for the basic stage to really communicate that this Pokemon was the fusion of both animals, but Kecleon imitates these eyes to an extent already, and I want to make sure that the two Pokemon feel completely distinct from each other. Otherwise, this Pokemon's concept becomes muddled. We could easily compare the two Pokemon. I want to avoid that at all costs. Last note for this evolution, it does gain the dragon typing. Now you might ask, what merits this? Well, first of all, I can do whatever I want, don't hate me, but look at Vibrava. Why is that a dragon type? Who knows? But secondarily, I do feel like its snout and general appearance as it begins to shift away from its seahorse genetics gives this Pokemon a dragon-like feel. It's a mystical, magical Pokemon. Sure, it's bizarre, but I don't think that would prevent it from being a dragon type. This, of course, builds up to this Pokemon being a regional pseudo-legendary, and I'm very excited to show you what comes next. For now, meet Camouflage, the Sea-Million Pokemon. Camouflage have an interesting habit of curling up into type balls and camouflaging themselves for long periods of time. Some researchers believe this behavior is an attempt to focus energy on growth and development in preparation for evolution. Others believe that this storing of power combats what appears to be unstable DNA sequences that could disrupt normal body function within this Pokemon. Regardless, their camouflage has made them difficult to find and hypotheses very difficult to test. Okay, now for the big reveal, the big kahuna of Matanui. I have got to rewatch that Scooby-Doo movie, but anyways, that's probably right. The goal here, for my video, not for the Scooby-Doo movie, is to make the coolest possible seahorse chameleon dragon that I can imagine. Now, to do this, I'm going to try and solve one of the biggest complaints that many Pokemon fans have with Pokemon like Arceus and Silvally. What is the point of changing types with an item if your form doesn't even change a little bit? Sure, Arceus changes colors on its weird hip ring things. Yeah, that happens, but that's it, and it's kind of lame. And same with Silvally, except less. You have the discs, but they don't amplify or adapt any of the existing features to fit to that new form. I've seen a lot of fans try and rectify this by creating new forms for these Pokemon based off of a singular typing. A lot of them are amazing, and I love the concept, but I'm not going to steal another person's ideas. It's always bothered me too, especially when I was a kid. So I've set out to make things right by creating a completely new Pokemon that changes forms when it changes types using a held item. We're going to need a base for these forms to be built off of, though, and that's what you're seeing here. This idea came along because chameleons change color, but some seahorses have specific camouflage adaptations. You see this in Skrelp and Dragalge. The leaf-like structures present on their bodies are intended to resemble those we find on seahorses, a specific kind that we commonly call sea dragons. My idea became, what if instead of just changing colors, this Pokemon possesses the genetic capability to alter its physical appearance almost like an octopus? But what items could I use to enable this change? I didn't want to make new items just for this Pokemon. I'm already doing that for my special G-Max forms and for my legendaries, so I settled on using the 5 major evolutionary stones: Fire, Water, Thunder, Ice, and Leaf. And before you make any jokes about Avatar, I tried to write them into the script, but I couldn't get it to work. Give it a shot in the comments if you want to, I guess. But anyways, I can always make more forms for this Pokemon and build upon it if there's other stones that I like. The other nice thing would be that unlike your evolutions, you aren't stuck with your decision and you can adapt to your environment, meaning you can switch out these stones and still get that new form, get that new cool Pokemon. This is why this Pokemon has to be a pseudo-legendary. I think the ability to change forms and typings is going to be overpowered, and so to rectify this, I don't think it will have abilities well in any of the forms, and its base ability would just be this Pokemon can change forms based on specific held items. I'll hit this more as we go over the forms, but specific areas of focus are going to be the arms, the tail, and the crest on its head for each of the forms, and the base. I've tried to make them interesting enough in the base form, yet give room for alterations as things get mixed up. You'll see what I mean. Let's go over our Pokedex entry, and then we can talk about designing new forms. Meet Camouflage, the changeling Pokemon. Camouflage is a powerful dragon-type Pokemon even in its base form, but its true power lies in the ability to harness evolutionary stones. When implanted in its crest, Camouflage's physical form will change to match the stone, now reshaped into a horn. Many have speculated that its potential is limitless if the right stones can be found, but as it stands, this Pokemon has 6 known forms. Okay, I don't want to talk about each of these forms too much, but I do want to illustrate my process for creating them, especially with the different stones involved. For the Thunderstone form, which I'm calling the Thunder form, I wanted to make this Pokemon longer and lankier, give it the jagged frill you see on its head. Where there is normally a concave spot, you can see a reformed thunderstorm in the shape of a lightning bolt acting as its new horn. Its tail fin is also a thunderbolt shape, and you can now see that its arm pauldrons and tail are completely covered in thunderclouds. I'm not making that change for all the forms, but some of them felt like small changes or more dramatic changes would be more appropriate. You'll see what I mean as we go on. For Frost form Camouflage, powered by a newly icicled ice stone in its crest, I want it to be the spiniest, more defensive form of Camouflage. I don't know if these forms come with stat changes. I think I'll leave it just for type changes for now. Regardless, in this form, it turns its tail fin into a snowflake spine and gains another one on its back. Additionally, its limbs and tail receive icicle spikes that match its ice stone appearance and make it quite the prickly Pokemon. I imagine that when you change this Pokemon's form, the 4th attack slot will change types with it, but I'm at a little bit of a loss in terms of what move each form should get. Comment and let me know what you think the best electric, fire, ice, grass, and water type moves are. I'd love some help determining which move each form should add. Next up is Camouflage's Oceanic form. While this Pokemon has moved away from its seahorse features in all other forms, this one is intended to be a reversion back to those shapes. I did decide that it would be more interesting if its tail had a shell though, and you can even see where its leg nubs are underneath that shell. The tail has also reverted back to being curled frontwards instead of backwards. Its shoulder pauldrons are also spiraled shells as well to help reinforce the idea. The last major change to this form is that it loses its biceps and its arm fins get much larger. It has a matching fin on its tail and shell as well, and I imagine that in the water this Pokemon can actually be deceptively fast. Second to last is going to be Camouflage's Foliage form, which gains the grass typing from the leaf stone embedded in its forehead. Now that was actually a little tricky, because unlike the other evolutionary stones, the grass stone is just a fossilized leaf. It's not some kind of leaf energy encased in a crystal. I tried a few different things and settled on the concept that this horn should resemble the glossy texture of the other horns still. Since they're being reformed anyways, it felt alright. This form is a little more slender than some of the other forms, but most notably it has a very long snout and mouth and very large hands. Its tail transforms into a leafy bush and it gains another new horn on the bridge of its nose as well. This one is meant to be the sly one of the group, slinking around the darker areas of the forest. And finally, we have the Ember form of Camouflage, powered by a Firestone. I wanted this form to be a bit tankier in appearance. While Thunder and Foliage forms are slender and quick, forms like Ember and Frost are meant to be tankier, but they embody the idea in different ways. Ember form is meant to be a special attacker who spits fire long distances to deal damage. Getting up close is meaninglessly dangerous because getting through its thick body to deal damage is difficult and you expose yourself to unnecessary risk. I like his little mustache, as most of the forms have that wavy ship in their upper lip, and I used it as an excuse to give him a little dragon whiskers. So here's the rundown of all the forms back to back. You have Camouflage, an all-arounder normal dragon type. You have Thunderform Camouflage, a slender and quick special attacker that becomes an electric dragon type. You have Frostform Camouflage, a spiky defensive physical attacker who becomes an ice dragon type. There's Oceanic Form Camouflage, who can move at high speeds underwater as a water dragon type. Next is Foliage Form Camouflage, whose thorns and bristles make it a quick physical attacker and a grass dragon type. And the final form is Camouflage's Ember Form, a tanky special attacker who can breathe fire as a fire dragon type Pokemon. You may see all of these forms and have your own thoughts and ideas about what other stones we could use to evolve this Pokemon. And I have some ideas too, but here's what I want you to do. Choose a new typing that I haven't used to make one of these forms. Create a new evolutionary stone for that type, and then design a Kamiya for yourself. I'll take the one that I like most and add the new item and your new form to the region. I'll give you about a month, so we'll announce the winner, or winners if I can't make up my mind, in March. Thanks for tuning in this week. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.